So I'm talking today with Nina Sankovic, the author of American Rebels, who will be speaking with us on Thursday, June 25th, starting at 7 o'clock. You can join us on Zoom or just watch us on the library's YouTube channel, youtube.com/Thomas Crane Public Library. I hope you enjoy our conversation. I'm joined today by Nina Sankovic, talking to me about her book, American Rebels, which will be a program here at the Thomas Crane Library here on Zoom. We're really looking forward to having her talk to us at length about her book, but I had the pleasure of talking to Nina today. So welcome, Nina. Thanks for talking to me.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is great. Thank you.
These are such strange times, but they're certainly not unprecedented. American history has examples of Americans living through some pretty incredible experiences. How did you learn? How did you get interested in this history?
Well, the way that I came to write American Rebels is I was researching my last book, The Lowells of Massachusetts, and one of the Lowells that I looked at was John Lowell, who was a lawyer during the Revolutionary War. And a big figure in financing, especially the Revolutionary War, making sure there was money to keep the battles going, to keep the fight going. But he was actually slow coming to the decision to rebel against Great Britain, against England. And that really surprised me, because I think so often when we're young, we're taught, there was a decision to rebel and all the colonists joined in and the fight was fought. But in fact, it was a really difficult decision that people had to make. Do you stay loyal to this country that since you were born, you've been taught to be loyal and dutiful to England? Or do you take this huge risk and rebel against England, put your life on the line, your security on the line, your family's future on the line, to try to see if you can create a new country? I mean, that was a huge decision. So I wanted to find a community to study that had both people who decided to rebel and people who decided to stay loyal, and how they sort of came to that decision process. I wanted to see how that decision cut across class lines, how it cut across gender lines. So I was in the Massachusetts Historical Society, just kind of going through records, and I came across this fascinating book, Where Independence Began. And it actually laid out this argument that independence began in Braintree. And there I was surprised to find John Hancock was from Braintree. John Adams was from Braintree. Abigail Adams spent most of her childhood in Braintree. Josiah Quincy Jr., who was this forgotten hero of the American Revolution, he was from Braintree. And there were also loyalists who were from Braintree. So I thought, fine, great, I've discovered my community to study. And I just dove in. And I did find that this decision to rebel or stay loyal, it did, women took both sides on the issue, cut across social classes. From the women that I studied, I have to say, in some ways, they actually led the issue. They led that decision. They were for it. Maybe they saw some possibility for themselves under a new regime, or they saw how much their families were suffering under the old regime. But what you were saying about these times that we live in, as I was doing my research now, I could have no idea of what was coming in terms of COVID-19. But there are so many parallels. I mean, they lived through epidemics, which devastated towns. I mean, towns were populations were halved by these smallpox that came through, dysentery that came through, and to see just the fortitude that they had, in facing these illnesses, but also in facing the British oppressions and in facing this very uncertain future, which is what we are facing now, just how strong they were and resolved. But not always, because they were human. And that's what I also liked discovering, was how completely flawed these heroes of the American Revolution were. And because I got to know them so intimately through letters and journals, I really feel like I got to know them in a way that makes us all see we're all flawed, but we all have the capability to rise to the occasion. Hopefully.
That is a great reminder right now. Yes, to inspire us, but help us be kind to ourselves as well.
Yeah.
It can be really hard to find that kindness in these days. And it sounds like you tapped into that. That's pretty incredible. Did you do most of your research with the Quincy, with the Boston Historical Society, Massachusetts Historical? Did you come into Quincy and do some research here?
Massachusetts Historical Society. I spent a lot of time in Quincy. I came to the Cambridge Historical Society, which had so much great information about Samuel Quincy especially. So yeah, I did some research at I did research all over, but I have to say the Massachusetts Historical Society, wow, what a collection they have, and how helpful everybody that works there is. So helpful and so knowledgeable. So they were immensely just such a support system for me.
That's great. And I know behind you, you have a outline that you actually used when you were writing the book. Did you do most of the writing there in your study right there where you are right now?
I did. So
that's just kind of special about this event. We wouldn't get that if you were coming to see us in the library.
No, it's true. My process is I have to write everything down. I mean, I bring my computer with me everywhere I go, but when I'm doing research, I like to write everything down. I write it down. They give you the special little papers to use in the different research areas. And then I write them down in notebooks that I have. And then I create note cards of every event or quote or letter or birth or death that I want to make sure shows up in the book. And they end up on these posters. And these are just a few of them. I have about 20 posters just to keep me on track, just to make sure I don't leave anything out. And of course, I had to leave a lot out because otherwise the book would have been 800 pages, 1,000 pages. But
yeah, I've seen those history books. Yours is much easier to get through.
This is just the way for me to stay on track. And also when I start losing sort of, what am I doing? It can kind of spark some new ideas of what I should be focusing on. So, yeah.
And when you created this book, you mentioned your previous book, The Lowells of Massachusetts. Did you work with the same editor? What's your editing process in that, the whole creative process?
I did work with the same editor, Michael Flamini from St. Martin's, and he was wonderful. He was great for having me really cut out things that were like, maybe we don't need this, maybe we don't need, keeping it as sort of focused as possible. And since I'm dealing with 3 different families and different members of 3 different families, I really did have to try to keep things focused. When I write a history like this, I want it to read like a novel, but it's all completely factual. Everything came from a journal, a diary, a historical record, a newspaper. But for me, it's so much, these people's lives were like a novel. So let's read it and really discuss it as like we're talking about a book that we're reading for book club. I mean, these were real people who had these real emotions and real struggles. And that's what I really wanted to bring across.
Well, that's great. So it's just challenging. When you come and speak with us, you're going to, obviously people will learn about the book, but normally we would have books available. You could sell books if you wanted to. You could be signing books. Is there a way that St. Martin's is helping? Is it just Amazon that you're directing people to who want to buy it, or how are people talking about getting your book these days?
Yeah, I mean, I have my website and St. Martin's website has different places that you can go. You can just go straight to IndieBound, so that sends you to your favorite independent bookstore. I have some of my favorite independent bookstores on my site. Amazon obviously is a big provider, but what's interesting is I just read an article about how ebook sales have actually gone down and hardcover sales. And that really interested me. And I hope that is helping all those independent bookstores. I hope that people are just flooding their independent bookstores with requests for American Rebels.
That's right.
Let's support our local bookstores who have been so supportive of me during this very interesting time to launch a book. So yeah, it is pretty easy to find my book, and there is a wonderful audio version. The woman who narrates she did such a great job. I reached out to her to talk to her. She actually lives in Alaska, and we've become friends because she's such an interesting person, how she came to audio tapes, and that they don't even read the book before they start recording it. They kind of skim it, but they want to be as fresh and sort of excited about the reading as anyone first approaching the book. So I found that fascinating, and her her narration of my book is just wonderful.
Wow, that's got to be, to hear your words from somebody else. You know, some of my favorite books, like I think of Patti Smith's book, memoirs that she's read, or that she's written and then read herself, and they're so much fun to listen to because I love listening to Patti Smith.
She does a great job. She has such a great voice. There are some authors who are like, no, find someone else. So I'm glad that St. Martin's found Susie Alphins for me, because she does a wonderful job.
Well, that's delightful to hear.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else you'd like to give thanks to? I know it's such a creative process and there's a lot of solitary work, but we can't, no author who's successful really does it by themselves. People who want to go and self-publish and think they can do it by themselves, you usually can tell. So is there anybody else you'd like to give a shout out to really quick while we have a moment?
I mean, we've talked about this already, but everybody at the Massachusetts Historical Society, they are so helpful, so kind, so generous. Their collection's amazing, and they know their collection, and they're very supportive. I actually had a fellowship there, and that helped. They have this program for the fellows. So we had lunch meetings, and we had lunch meetings to talk about what we were working on, but then also lunches out to just talk. So it was a very, as you say, it can be a very solitary process, but by creating an environment that people can work together. And what was interesting too is that a lot of the people working on projects at the Massachusetts Historical Society are academics. And yet they were so welcoming of me. I'm an independent writer, I'm not an academic. And they didn't say, okay, we're not going to talk to you. They discussed ideas with me. They gave me ideas of how my research should go. So that was really helpful, and I appreciated that.
Did you study history when you were in college?
I did. I was a history major, an American history major at Tufts. So
okay. Yeah. So, and I bet you went to Harvard Law as well. So
I did, and I actually went to law school thinking I would study the history of law, but then I got very excited about the practice of law, and so I kind of have circled back. Took me a while, but came back.
So you practiced for a while and did that, and then came back and have been writing. And you write full time, or are you still practicing law too?
Yeah,
just writing?
I write full time. Yeah.
Do you have another research project, or are you just working on helping this one find its wings?
I have two different projects that I'm looking at right now, both around the Revolutionary War. It's just an area that I find so interesting because it was such a turbulent time, and because I think the story we're taught, especially in elementary school, middle school, high school, is so simplistic, really, about what it was like. For so many people, it was a terrible and very uncertain time. And because of what we're going through now, there's so many resonant themes. What is the role of the truth in the media? What is the role of our leadership? What is the role of our community? What is the role of living day by day and just trying to get through that way? So there's so many parallels. I find it fascinating.
And the outcome, when we learn about the revolution today, we know how it ended, but it didn't have to end that way. That's
right.
Fascinating when you go into the history. It's like there are all these other ways it could have gone.
Right. And
then what people were involved in.
What after it was over, what sort of disarray, so many things. We had set up a system for government, and yet individual communities were at a loss. So what I find interesting is this sudden renewed fervor, religious fervor, but not just sort of congregationalist, Puritan religious fervor, but it led to the Second Great Awakening, this evangelical fervor. So some of the people that I'm looking into now are these primarily female traveling preachers who, because women took on so many roles during the revolution that they hadn't had before, people were more open perhaps to listening to females. And there were some incredible sects that evolved. Now, the Shaker one is obviously the most famous, but there were other ones. And so I'm looking into that, and I'm finding it all very inspirational. But one interesting barrier for all historical researchers right now is that we can't go anywhere. So if these files aren't online, you're just kind of
accessible.
To do. I can't go to the Historical Society. I can't go to Yale's Beinecke Library. We have to do it all from home, and that's tough.
That is hard, and that's a good call. That as much as we can digitize these collections when we get access to them, we need to do that for these accessibility
kinds
reasons.
of situations. Yeah.
Well, Nina, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today. I am super excited for the program where everybody gets to hear and learn more about this book. And it sounds like there's some great work in the pipeline. So I'm really excited to see how that comes together.
Thank you. Thank you. It was so much fun to talk to you.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. Thank you.